introduction and ask a starter question for the three of you, and then open it up to questions and ideas coming from the floor here. The idea of this three-part series is to give you folks as parents a better sense of what goes on in the Woods building as it connects to what goes on here. This is the time of year when often families are thinking about, where's my kid going? I would encourage you to think about not only next year and the year after, but 3 and 5 and 8 years down the road as much as you can, because what we're doing here is helping kids get ready for middle school and beyond, not just for the next year. So, I do both. Nice, Sarah. So, Kathy, Alice, and Steve are all here from different classrooms, different lengths of tenure at the school, all who have taught different age levels here. My first question for you folks is if you could take a minute and just think about any guiding question that you think these folks ought to be thinking about as they think about their child or children moving from the Meadows building to the Woods building. What are some of the things they ought to consider and wonder about?
Can I first make some history?
Please,
so people
that's
know my
even
background.
better.
I think first I want to say that people should know that I taught in the, why am I here? I teach in the Meadows building. Well, I taught in this building for 10 years. I moved to the Woods building and taught there for 20 years, and now I'm back in this building. So I've done both, and actually a number of teachers have made that switch. Steve is one who's taught in both buildings. Alice, you were a TA in this building, right? Alice was a TA in this building, and there are several other teachers who've moved back and forth. So there's fairly fluid movement back and forth in that building. So that first, I think people need to know that it's not this sort of, they aren't separate universes. And at one of our meetings this week, someone had said that if we were all in one building, we wouldn't be having this meeting. We wouldn't be discussing this. It's not, there's not as big a divide as the geography would have you believe. I think that's important to know. So, being that, my question would be, is your child thriving? You know, that's what you want to ask yourself. Is my child thriving now? Because if they're thriving now, they will continue to thrive. You know, that's what you want to ask yourself. Is my child thriving?
So I'm Alice, and I've taught in the Woods building for 9 years, and I started out teaching 7 and 8-year-olds in that building, so kind of at the younger end of the transition from Meadows to Woods. And I've been teaching the oldest class, which is typically a 9, 10, 11-year-old class. Sometimes we have 12-year-olds as well, for 8 years. And the question I might be wondering, if I were you, is how will you know that my child is prepared for middle school, for that transition? What indicators what does the little school do to bring them to that point where they're barely writing as 5 and 6-year-olds to being able to write essays and make the transition to a middle school environment? So I hope to sort of share with you what it looks like at the upper end of the building as they make the transition in their last year or two at middle school. I hope to sort of allay some of your, maybe if you have some worries about what your little 5 or 6-year-old is doing right now, and what kind of growth you'll see as they move through.
Thanks, Alice. Hi, I'm Steve Goldenberg, and I taught for 27 years in this building, and 3 years ago I finally transitioned to the Woods building. So I'm here to tell you that it is possible. But I also
Not all students will say
Only the lucky ones.
But I really do want to reiterate what Kathy said, and I can tell you from personal experience, I've taught for those 27 years, and I've taught the oldest class on this end, and now the past 3, the youngest class in the Woods, and what I do in the classroom is not affected by my building I'm in. So I think the title of this meeting is a bit of a misnomer. I think it's really good and valid to be taking a look at, do you want your child to continue in our program? But like Kathy said, I will not just focus on Woods or Meadows. It's a level, and the level of a kid, you know, is generally the 6 and 7-year-olds is where that split happens, and we can have those kids in this program, in this building, in our same program, or in the Woods program, and be in that same level. In terms of a question to ask, I would ask you to really think about your genuine feelings but you really want a program that is child-centered. From my perspective, this might not be the easiest program to be a parent in. You're not getting as many discrete numbers, and okay, my child is in first grade and second grade. You're not getting the test score, that 87 on the score, or the A or the B. And also, this place is probably not the easiest place to be a teacher. You have to prepare for many different things. It's definitely not the easiest place to be an administrator. You have to, there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of subtleties that are not defined, but it's a great place to be a kid. It's all set up so that the kids are having the maximum positive experience, and we're maximizing their growth, which makes it really messy for the rest of us. But, so there's oftentimes this could be the right program for your child, but not for a parent. Because it's hard to explain that to your neighbor, to your parents, to your friends. So I would take a look at that.
So my thought is for you folks to ask some questions that are on your mind, and at some point, I noticed at least that Kathy and Steve brought some things to share. So another thing to do at some point is to talk a little bit about what you're working on in your class these days. But first, things that occur. Yeah, Melissa.
I was just curious, last year at the end of the year, the teachers asked us for feedback as, do you want your child to stay with this person or that person, or not that that's a promise to anything, but just give us some feedback on what you're thinking. So at the end of this year, is it likely we will give feedback as to how we feel, whether we feel they're ready for the transition, or whether it's really even, I know we're saying it's not really much of a transition, but I was just curious if we have any input into it, or whether it is part of the mystery of
It's definitely part of the spring parent conference, particularly for the kids that are, and some of that depends on your child, are they ready, do you think they're ready, what are your, but some of it depends on enrollment. If we are glutted with, older kids, there have been years when there have been 6 turning 7-year-olds in this building, and there have been years when there have been 5-year-olds in that building. So some of it just depends on enrollment patterns. How many kids are outgrowing, where do we have gluts of people? So it's, the transition, I would say the biggest part of the transition, if we're looking at all things being equal, there's a class in this building that's basically the same age and a class in that building that's the same age. One of the things we might look at is a little bit bigger class size up there. That's the main difference really between the two buildings is class size. These rooms are smaller, they can only handle fewer kids, those rooms are bigger. But yeah, we definitely is something that teachers can talk with people about comments. And again, no promises, because it's more than, it's like a school, we can give each child their ideal placement, probably wouldn't work for any of them, because what's ideal for one child might not make a good class for everybody.
Right.
While it would be simpler to just say, this year you're going to be here, next year there, it's really not better for kids. We really want to be sure they're placed with their best peer group possible, and the place where they're going to learn and thrive the best. And that takes looking at all the permutations and combinations, and making us all have, it seems like, endless meetings to figure this out. So parent information is really helpful. But it's one of many factors.
Thank you.
I have a question. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Steve.
Next door.
Alice.
Alice. So you made a comment about the reading and writing, not having that, and then how that transforms as they get older. And I know that, like, for example, the Waldorf School has a very intentional, we don't want them reading until a certain age because that's, not fitting with developmentally, whatever the philosophy is there. I have a kiddo who wants me to teach him how to read. I have no idea how to do that, so I'm going to actually get a tutor to do that. What is the philosophy around those kinds of things?
So I didn't.
Because you kind of mean it's a bit intentional, and I'm just trying to.
No, I meant that their development of reading and writing looks different at this age.
Oh,
so
gotcha.
There's no hesitation about teaching reading and exposure to literacy learning.
Okay.
It's a rich foundation at all levels of the school for whatever's next. I think that there's no
there's no doubt you'd go into any of these classrooms in the Meadows building and you'd see literacy learning taking place almost all day long. So what it looks to learn how to read from the best practices of learning to read looks like a lot of books being shared, a lot of letter sound connections, a lot of words on the wall, a lot of labels. I mean, it looks, if you look into all these classrooms, you'd see a rich learning to read environment. When kids actually start to put together words and sentences, there's a real pretty wide developmental norm that's so between age 3, 7, sometimes those connections really happen. And I think what we do is try to take the pressure off often of making sure that every first grader passes the whatever reading test. So it's not a high pressure environment in terms of learning to read. But I've never had a student in my classroom who hasn't loved to read. We spend every morning reading for 30, 35 minutes. At the level I teach, it's pretty self-selected reading. Some years. Some other years we do, depending on my level, we do more of a genre study or kind of more guided independent reading. This class of kids, I've had many of them for two years. And so I kind of know them better as readers, and they really are at that level of fluent reading, most of them. And then the ones who are still kind of working on their reading fluency and their love of reading, they're in an environment of kids who there's a culture of that. So what I meant by the comment about kids in this building was that the foundation for that love of reading is really set and established, and also the skills. So, but what you see when you come into my classroom and you see a group of kids reading, you see them discussing literature, talking about characters, writing and reflecting on books and genres. I brought, just to illustrate that, a few book summaries and reviews, just so you can sort of see what their writing looks like at this level. And what I meant is that it's pretty cool when you think about, like if Steve showed you a sample of writing that 7-year-olds are doing, and then you look at what the 11-year-olds and 10-year-olds are doing, you'd see this amazing growth. And I think that that's a little bit hard to imagine. What I meant is it's hard to imagine when your child is 5 and they're barely writing letters or they're not putting the sounds together. So I'll just pass these around and you can see these are, every month the kids choose one of their independent reading books that they finished and they write a book review and summary. And they don't just write it, they learn how to write it. So we go through the steps of how it's done, how you make the introduction powerful, how you summarize, what kind of elements of the book you pull in, what the review paragraph should entail. So it's not just like they naturally, this is true for any of the classrooms, it's not like they naturally learn to read just because. There's a lot of intentionality from Julie's class and Barbara's class all the way up. So I think while it looks like a natural learning environment and looks low-key and sometimes a little less structured maybe, the results are really powerful. So I'll just pass, so that's just about reading, but I think that's true for other areas too. You can tell. I think too that the part that's important to note is that we think that children are learning to read all the time. You know, that it's there when they check in the morning and they sign their name or they see their classmate's name on the attendance list. I'm paying attention every day to whether my now 5-year-olds in my class, do they know all their classmates' names? Can they read those? Can they read the job chart? Can they read the symbols on the calendar? Can they do all those things? And then where do we go from there? Which of them can, if we start looking at sat, cat, mat, which of them, if I then put in front of it, will know that it's rat? That's all part of, and some of them are further along in the process than others, but they are basically, I would say in my 5-year-olds, they are all reading. They can decode text. Now it's just simply a matter of learning more, and the rate at which they learn the more will vary. But they're exposed to it constantly. They're also exposed to peers who are doing it constantly, but I think that it is something they learn, and it's something that you are doing the right things. I always tell parents that there's 2 things you need to do to teach your child to read. One of them is to take them on your lap and read to them. The other thing is to say, not now, honey, I'm reading. That they know that it's important and that it's fun and it's interesting. And that if you read to them, show them things, play with words, point out, read them books, they love to hear books over and over and over again, the same simple books. Read them, because that's how they learn. They read, they learn to memorize the book, and then they learn to identify the words, that works.
So one of the things that, Kathy brought up that I think is important is she talked about paying attention to her students and knowing which students were at which level. And I think that's one of the, probably the best kept secrets about our school is that we're really good at what now the rest of the educational community is catching up to and calling it differentiated learning and really letting kids learn at the level that's just right for them. So, for example, the whole class might be doing reading, but some kids will be reading on a higher level than others. And our job is to make that really okay, and not just tolerable, but really okay, that each kid feels really good about where they are and can work to their maximum capacity. And that's where the social and emotional element of the classroom is crucial, because kids have to be able to take risks. They have to feel comfortable being who they are, whether it's a kid who needs more support or whether it's a kid who's ready to fly. And they get that opportunity to do it without feeling that they're odd or weird. That's really embedded in our whole program.
How do you, like, what is an example of how you would do that with 12 kids in a class?
A great example. I can give you two examples. So, one is every day we have a reading group time. It's part of our 4 Blocks program, which is our school's adopted literacy curriculum that's done throughout the program. Where there's leveled reading, which is where the teacher assigns the level. There's kids choosing their own books. There's word play, and there's writing activities. So in our reading group, there are some kids who are just emerging readers, and they're working on books on this level, where they're still in the process of putting some basic sound symbols together. A lot of picture cue, a lot of support to do that. And they're getting materials to help them to do that. And then at the very same time, there's other kids reading on what would be probably considered grade level for a 6-year-old who are at this point able to read this with little support, maybe an occasional help from a friend or even a teacher. And then at the same time, there are kids working on this, on these level books, who are able to read at a very advanced level. Many of these kids can actually read at a higher level than this, which is still way above grade level. But they're being asked to demonstrate full comprehension and to work kind of similar to what Alice was talking about, what the older kids are doing to really discuss the subtleties and the nuances of it. So
Those kids are how old?
6 and 7.
The way it might look in my class, again, we don't need to only focus on reading, but for now, since you have these examples in your hands of the book summary, so some kids really there's a level of independence as a writer that's got a real continuum to it. So some of my students, I've got 17 students, I introduce something, show them some examples, do some teaching around it, and then they're pretty independent with applying those things. Others really require kind of one-on-one coaching through the steps of this writing process. If you came into my classroom, and these are examples from a smattering of kids, you'd see on the wall all of their book summaries, and they would look kind of, the results would look kind of the same. I mean, you'd see it the same strong quality. But some of the kids it took to get to that quality took twice as long and a lot more coaching. And so I think of it as, and that's true in other curricular areas too, where I think with small class sizes and with a kind of a really strong classroom community of where there's a lot of independent worker sort of initiative, but also a lot of teacher coaching and support that goes into helping kids not feel badly that they're writing more, they need that. But that's where they're at right now. And so I try to set it up as, and that's true for math. So for example, in math, I'll teach a lesson. Right now, we've been working on a lot of multiplication of bigger numbers, different strategies, algorithm, and different other methods to get to an answer. So really, rather than
sort of an answer-driven lesson. It tends to be more inquiry-driven. So how that might interest a kid who has higher math skills is that they're having to consider and think about different solutions or different strategies and methods than just the one that they know. And again, setting them up for some independent work and then working with the kids who need some extra support is a very typical way of differentiating math instruction. I don't have different math groups. I could. I have really different math levels, but I don't. I think differentiation is sometimes mistaken as different skill groups that are all kind of working different things. And I think and it can look like that and can be appropriate that way for some things and sometimes. But I think there's real richness to social learning, not about social skills in this case. I mean, the learning of a group tackling some problems together, and what a higher and more advanced mathematical thinker brings to a discussion that a more beginning foundational level thinker brings to it is actually very interesting. And it's not all the child who's still kind of grappling with the concept can bring a really rich piece of the discussion to the table. And by challenging the advanced thinker to explain their thinking to the foundational thinker, they then expand. I mean, they both benefit from that. But it doesn't. I don't find it holds back the higher end kids either, because we also have a lot of time where they can take it and go with it, and then there's time to work with the kids who are struggling a little bit more. Again, more as a kind of a coach would work with them, not as somebody who's going to remediate, because that's where they're at. And I think that's the culture that makes kids really comfortable about being in a classroom, allows them to love learning, allows them to connect and respect their peers who are at different levels, and to not just tolerate them, but to really see the different qualities that they bring. So if you came into my classroom at math time, you'd see everybody engaged and interested in thinking and learning and working together. And these are kids who are kind of all different levels in math in some ways, but can kind of pull together. So I think that's one of the things our kids do is appreciate the range of skills that any class has, and that they come to know themselves deeply about what they are good at and what they have to, not what they are bad at, but what they have to work harder at. I think that's the part we want them to know, is that they can do things if they work harder at it. My favorite quote from a 5-year-old years and years ago, who's actually now probably old enough to be a parent, turned to me one day and said, "How come John's in our class if he can read?" And I just sat there for a minute. I didn't say anything, which is often our way. It's like, let them think about it, find up an answer. And he looked at me and he says, "Well," I said, "Well, what do you think?" He says, "Well, I can tie my shoes, but I can't read. And John can read, but he can't tie his shoes." This is before Velcro. But I thought that was exactly where I want these kids to be, to know, oh, he's got something he's good at, I've got something I'm good at, we can help each other. And in fact, he did tie John's shoes, and John would read to him. And the kid now reads, and he's perfectly successful. Yeah, and John can tie his shoes around. He probably has slip-ons, or Velcro.
But one of the real key things that I think both Kathy and Alice are speaking to is having the kids feel good about what they're doing. Still working towards that mastery level, but if we called them a C student, that would affect their feeling about themselves and their long-term ability to be effective. So that's why we don't give grades. It's not because we don't want you to know, or we aren't keeping track. We're keeping really close track, and hopefully in our conferences we share that information with you, so it's transparent. But to box and label a kid like that is really a total disservice to them. And it's really counterproductive, even though it is what happens in most places. But best practices say to not do that. And it's what Alice was saying about the differentiated learning is really true. The only time it happens in my classroom is during reading groups, because the disparity of what the kids need is so huge that I really couldn't, it really would hold back those real high-end kids who needed to fly, and it wouldn't support the kids who are just starting. But math is a perfect example. So last month, we're all part of this Turk Math, the Turk Math Investigations curriculum. Counting in number is what is for my level kids. And we were doing investigations of odd and even numbers. And the kids made charts of, here's an example for one. Kids starting to make a chart of some numbers. They like to use bingo dollars to see all the different patterns. But the best part for me is when they started having discussions about how can you tell if a number is odd or even. And as it turns out, there's not only one way to tell, there's many different ways. And they started to share that information with each other. And they were basically constructing their ideas. Now, I could have told them that, any number that is a multiple of 2 will always be a number, and some of them would have remembered that and been able to use it. But when they actually had the chance to talk with each other, to test it out themselves, then it really becomes their knowledge. So now they're working on multiples of different numbers, finding prime numbers. But even so, there are still kids, as Alice was saying, well, we all might be doing that type of math together and having those discussions. There are kids at other times who just really need more. And there are some kids now who are doing these puzzles. They wanted the extra hard challenge work. They're doing puzzles where they're translating numbers into Roman numerals and fitting them on the grid. And I would have a hard time doing this. Bet most of you would. I would never in a million years assign this to a child. But part of differentiated learning, just part of best practices, is having these materials available so that kids who are ready, and especially when they're asking for it and wanting it, they can step into it.
Yes.
I have 2 questions. What is the age group of the children who wrote these curriculum?
I have 9, 10, 11-year-olds this year. So if they were in public school or schools that had grades, I would have kids who were old, an old 3rd grader, and very young, like September birthday, 6th grader. So
the second question is, what do you do with a child who actually could probably go further, but is very comfortable traveling in their safety zone? Like you gave the example of children who are asking for those very difficult puzzles.
I think Kathy, or maybe Alice touched on that. There's something that happens in social learning that when peers are doing it, and if the group is really connected and working together, it really does pull things up. It really creates interesting. I mean, I can tell you this, that this particular group I have, they love math. They, as a whole group, if they have free choice, they might do math together. They might all opt into that. In a different set of circumstances, probably only a handful would. But that's only because of the excitement of that for the kids. So,
I think and then there's some kids who just really need this is where building that relationship with the kids so that they trust you know them and who they are as a learner as best you can. For example, with these book reviews again, there are some kids who, in their rough draft, would say, I'm done. And I'll look at it, we'll read it together, and we'll have a discussion about some of the other pieces they could have put in it, and I'll expect them to do that. So there are definitely expectations all across the board. So same with math. So because of the opportunity to check in. So I don't typically collect work, grade it, send it back. So because a lot of the work, I'm watching them work on. So the assessment and the feedback and the evaluation is ongoing, kind of in process. Which, again, for that might work with middle school kids or high school kids to get a paper back and go, oh yeah, I should have dotted my I's and put some extra elaboration in there. But typically, it's in the moment of when you can really get them to put that effort in, is where it matters, not getting the grade afterwards. So most of that slacking or lazy sort of work, I'd rather go outside, so I'm going to rush this through and finish it. That doesn't really.
We know. We know.
Typically,
Here's the bottom line, even with the 2 and 3-year-olds.
yeah, and you'd see if you came in, I mean, I invite you to come and just kind of tour, look around in my classroom. You'd see the quality of work, not just in writing and math, but also in the creativity. I mean, we've got kids who are kind of naturally more artistic or more better at sketching and seeing, putting an image on paper, but you'd see effort, and even the kids who it's more a struggle for, you'd see this kind of effort that what would look like to you would be quality work in front of you, but what you'd see, it would be more interesting if you actually could see them working, because you'd see the focus and the intention that goes into their work that part contagious, and part of it is a sort of an environment of expectations that are high for kids.
And I think, I mean, that even starts at my level, and it can be something as simple as they come to a table full of Play-Doh and stay there for 2 minutes and then move on. And I might say, you know, what else could you do with that? You know, I'm asking them to stretch it just a little bit. I think the other piece that often plays into this, you know, not wanting to do the most or their best has to do with the difference between their relationship with a parent and their relationship with a teacher. You know, that they will resist things that you ask them to do where they won't with us. I mean, just simply because of our different role. We are not their parents. So
I have a 6th grader and an 8th grader at home who are my own children, and it's very hard for me to get writing out of them.
Yeah, it just, so I think that's the other piece, is that it may encourage you to know we get their best behavior, which is of course what you want, right? You know, you want their best behavior to be out here in public. We hope they're civil at home, but the fact of the matter is they are different children at school than they are at home, and I think that's a piece to remember. That is why you think, oh, my child would never do that, or my child, you know, they seem so, you know, they resist every time I ask them to do something. Well, at school, it's a different, I mean, their personalities remain the same, but the battles are different. And some of it's built into the structure of the class. When they're home, there's not a structure, it's just, you know, you and however many kids you have. Whereas when there are 13, 14, 15 other kids doing it, it changes the dynamic.
I think the other thing I just want to add is we have a deep and abiding faith in kids, that they are naturally curious and they want to learn. And if we provide the right conditions for them, they will. So we have to make it safe for them, we have to make it interesting, we have to give them some measure of control. We also sometimes have to give them some measure of nudge, too. It's a dance that goes back and forth, and they really, you know, they really buy into that. They really respect being pushed. If it's the right push at the right time with the right person who has a relationship with them, whether it's peers or adults. So it does happen. It's easy for me as a teacher to say that happens, and much harder as a parent. But it takes trust. It takes really trusting your child. I have, you know, in my 30 years, I can count on one hand the number of kids who really have been hardcore resistant to learning in this environment. And that tells me they're just, this isn't a good fit for them. But the overwhelming majority of kids really think that this is great. They enjoy it. So.
I'm just thinking from practical sense. From meadows to woods, is there a difference as you're looking, not just academically, but socially as well? It's a larger class size. I imagine they have to have greater social skills to cooperate and do those types of things. How is that sort of put in the mix when that decision in the amorphous process that exists to move over?
It's definitely in the mix, and there is a piece of, you know, bigger class size, so you want someone who is able to function smoothly, you know, on the other hand, eventually everybody moves, you know, so that's the piece, again, that's the piece of all things being equal, you know, classes of equal age in both buildings. You look at, okay, you know, would this child can we give them another year to develop those skills? And, you know, if we can, we will. I mean, I would always, because this is my early childhood background, I would always rather err on the side of caution, you know, give them time to develop those skills, because they'll get there. You know, they don't go to college sucking their thumb and wetting the bed. You know, they get there. Yeah, no, I can guarantee you. Guarantee it does not happen. You know, that does become a piece of it, but it's not. it's less of a big deal than it appears, partially because the Woods teacher and the Meadows teacher both adjust their class to the children they receive. If Steve's teaching the youngest kids in the Woods building, some years that means he's going to have 5- and 6-year-olds, which are very different than 6- and 7-year-olds. And he's going to adjust what he does, and particularly, I taught that youngest age for many years, and so you start out your year more Meadows-like, and you bring them along to, you know, a more structured, formal program, but it is a natural process of adapting. You always adapt to the children you have.
And I would also emphasize, I think you mentioned it, but if we were just one building and my class were down the hall from one
My class,
of the
yeah.
Meadows classes, it wouldn't seem like such a big distinction. It would just seem,
We wouldn't
so I think
be-
it's a bit of a false distinction between the buildings, although that's how sometimes we have to kind of think about things because we are
Well, just to
an
answer that
element,
question.
but we're an elementary school and with a early childhood program as well, that are all part of the same school. And I think that if we were in one building, it would be a lot easier for parents and teachers to kind of not worry about those distinctions so much, because it would be it would seem more seamless. But the classrooms do look, they're a little different, the physical structure layout of the classrooms are a little different in Woods. So, and other things are, the kids are older as a whole up there, so there does, I think where it's most challenging maybe is when there's that, kids of the same age in the Meadows as in the Woods, but I think Steve, who's taught in both, I think that it's the same program for, if there's a 7-year-old and those teachers, let's just use a concrete example, those teachers are in the same level, and we have level meetings as faculty, so that teacher would be meeting with a teacher who's that same level in the Woods building. So there would be that collegial, it would almost be like the distinction between the buildings is kind of invisible, because you have those teachers teaming and collaborating and talking as a level, which happens every year, actually, because that
So I can tell you that what happens in the classroom is not substantially different. There's no different expectation of ability to cooperate or organize or tolerate structure or handle more curriculum. And the difference in the size of group, to me, is really not a big factor between 12 and 15. It is a couple of more kids, but it doesn't functionally create a different paradigm. It's the same basic dynamics. So the one place where there is a different social context is out on the play yard, where if you're a 6-year-old or 7-year-old in this building, you are one of the oldest kids here. And if you're a 6- and 7-year-old in the Woods building, you are one of the youngest kids. So those areas, of course, are, do our best to supervise them as well as we can and make sure it fits for every child, which we would do in either building. But that, to me, is really the main substantive difference. And from my point of view, it doesn't seem like a really large issue. That, and also, I mean, we really don't know where your kids will be next year. Peter can vouch for this. Right? They might be here in the Meadows building. They might be in the Woods building. So, I would suggest focusing your energy in that direction. About, are you feeling comfortable with, being in our program, whether it's in Meadows or Woods.
So I'm going to jump in. It's a little close to 9:30, so if we have one or two more questions, great, and then we'll find other opportunities for these. So if you haven't asked a question, maybe
I
jump
just
in.
have a question for Alice. So you're teaching the oldest kids, and you might have the same child a couple years in a row. How do you change the curriculum so that they're in your class at 4th grade? If they're in there at 5th grade, is it the same stuff you do, or how do you sort of
Great question.
accommodate that?
And actually, I have 6 students this year who this is their 3rd year in my class. And that's unusual. It's because there was a bubble of kids who outgrew, that's our word for graduation, who outgrew. And so there was a lot of space in the upper level for kids to move up. So I had that year, a bunch of 9-year-olds, 8 turning 9-year-olds, and now they're 11, ready to launch into middle school in the fall next year. So, it's a terrific thing. It's, what I love about teaching here, one of the things I love about it is that there is, while we have curriculum resources that we use to support the work we do in math, reading, language arts, science, it's a lot of, it's so adaptable to what fits the group and what fits a particular set of kids. So, if I just look at math, for example, math learning spirals anyway, so that you don't just learn a concept or a skill and then never have to revisit it again. So there's a natural kind of spiraling and consolidating of skills and understanding around math concepts. So I never assume, even with a class I only have for 1 year, that I teach something and I'm never going to forget it or never going to need to revisit it. So there is definitely sort of a spiraling. The great thing is that I know what I've taught them and worked with them on. So if you just look, for example, at our investigations math curriculum, which is one of the curricular resources we have, there are, for our 5th grade level, 9 units, which is way more units than any even normal teacher in public school could probably teach in a year. It's developed to be too many, so that there's great overlap in, for example, if I taught this class, for example, 2-dimensional geometry unit last year with a lot of angles and polygons, but there are 2 units in the 5th grade that are about 2-dimensional geometry, and then also another one that's about 3-dimensional geometry. So even if I just stuck with the math curriculum, investigations curriculum, there's the lack of redundancy built into it. So I can kind of, and those build on each other too. And just because I'm teaching one that's a 5th grade doesn't mean that the younger student in my class can't access it. So they're pretty multi-accessible.
And also the science curriculums, you have different,
Yeah.
right? You have different,
So I've never taught the same science curriculum to this group, partly because we do a lot more than the FOSS. The FOSS science are the kits that are really great sort of process-oriented science. We have different areas. Right now I'm teaching magnetism and electricity, and I plan to use that one kit for most of the year, rather than doing 6 kits a year or something. It's one of the pieces of my science curriculum. The other pieces are much more built on what phenomena are coming to us. For example, there was a bird that was found outside of our classroom, which sort of launched a study of this. It was a varied thrush that had hit a window, and we did this study of this bird. It's kind of close sort of natural history investigation over a couple of weeks. We go every year on an extended field trip to Olympic National Park, and there's a lot of different, sometimes we study the watershed, and sometimes we study geology related to that, sometimes we study forest ecosystems. So there's just never an end to the kind of richness that you can pull into a class of kids.
Finish every day thinking we could have done more, and every year you think, oh, we never got to this, and oh, we never got, I mean, this all reminds me of my father's favorite phrase, is there's many ways to skin a cat. You know, you just don't do the same thing. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons we want to teach here, is that you don't do the same thing year after year. I think of my sister who teaches in a public school in California who, does ancient civilizations every year with her 6th graders. I mean, that's it. That's what she teaches. She doesn't have to think about it. She doesn't have to prep for it. She isn't creative about it. It's just, boom, here it is. But I could go on and on about it, because it is a kind of a nuanced thing. It takes some experience to figure out how to do that with groups of kids. But I'd say that there's value added in knowing the child, again, for another year, for at least 2 years is a really optimal thing. 3 years, I was a little worried that would I have anything fresh to offer. And we were having a fabulous year, great time, and I think it would be interesting to interview those kids and have them sort of explain what is it like having. I would encourage everyone to go onto the website, the parent dashboard, where you can read the class notes from the different classes. Go read the Woods Building teachers' notes. You get notes from your teacher every week about what's happening in your class, but go read those notes from the Woods Building teachers, and you'll get an incredible sense of what's going on up there. It's a wonderful way to find out.
So there are 2 great segues that I want to take advantage of. I know that there's some other questions, but we're also just beyond time, and I want to honor
My kids are expecting to come out here and be with Bill
Yes.
Big Lots.
So,
They're chasing you out
and
soon.
you folks are going on to other parts of your life. The segues were do more research, so I think Kathy's right on. Use the parent dashboard, and all of those letters that are written every single week are just a treasure trove of information and insight and perspective. And the other one is Alice's comment about kids. So a week from today, we're going to have a third of this series where we'll have some students from the Woods Building that can do exactly what Alice was suggesting, provide some perspective from a kid's point of view about what life is like as they're getting ready to move on from here to other school programs. So thank you, three of you. That's great, and great questions. Thank you. All right. Yeah.